In this video, we're going to be modifying our FMS Atlas 6x6. And we've had ours for a little while now and been itching to do a project on it. So that's what we're going to do in this video. We're going to tear into this thing and see what we can do for modifications. I've got some CR18P parts that will work on the Atlas. So we're going to overhaul the motor. We're going to stretch it and put big tires on it. We're going to try to put big shocks on it. This is going to be the first step in transforming this truck into a whole new beast. It's going to be fun. So let's jump in and check it out. All right, check it out. Here's what we got for mods. So first off, let's look at the tires I'm going to be putting on this thing. So I got these tires from FMS a while ago. It was around when the accessories for the Power Wagon started to come out. And I've never used them because I haven't really had an application for them. They're non-bead locks. They're tall. They're 1.2 inch wheels. But they've got these nice BFG mud terrain tires on them. They feel pretty good. They look pretty cool, nice and scale. So I thought these would be cool to put on this rig. It's going to be, they're big. I think they're around 65 millimeters tall. It's a big tire. And I have plenty of them. So I had 2 full sets of these just kind of lying around. So I've got 6 of these tires we're going to put all around on this thing. To fit these big tires, we're most likely going to need some more clearance in our wheel wells. So what I'm going to put on here, or try to put on here, is some TRX 4M shocks. Now, just looking at kind of the hardware on these and the size, I felt like this might be a good option. So that's what I'm hoping to utilize for suspension. That should give us a bunch of ride height and get rid of the bounce of the friction damped shocks. Next up, the exciting stuff, the power plant. So I got this RC all-wheel drive brushed motor combo. This is the 180 51 turn with the aluminum transmission and the metal gears. It's actually for an SCX24, but when RC all-wheel drive released these for the CR18P, they put out these skid plates that have the mounting holes necessary to mount up this transmission. Now the CR18P skid plate and the Atlas skid plate are exactly the same. So that's what kind of got me thinking about this whole build, was that I can put this 51 turn motor in here and start modifying this thing. So this is what we're hopefully going to use for the power plant. It looks like there's plenty of room in there. I think it should be a pretty simple drop in and go, hopefully. That's my plan. I know the skid will work. It's just getting this longer can to fit in there. Also, to fit the big tires on there, the biggest mod we have to do is stretch the rear end. Not necessarily these middle wheels here, although it might be close on that bend right there with the body. We'll see. But we're definitely going to have to stretch the rear axle out because these bigger tires are going to collide in the middle there. So I'm going to go through my graveyard of SCX24 parts and find some links to fit on here. So that's the plan. It's going to be kind of a Franken build, but it should be fun. So let's get after it. All right, guys, let me show you where I'm at here. So I've got the Traxxas shocks on the front and middle axles. Got this to work. I had to punch out the pivot hardware on the bottom of the shocks and just run a bolt through there. So the lower links are just pivoting on a bolt, which seems to be fine. This thing doesn't have huge articulation anyway. But the action is good, nice and smooth. The front is looking pretty cool. Looks pretty rad with these tires on there. They're awfully skinny though. But we're making progress there. Next up, I'm stretching the rear end. So I've got the rear axle off. I'm going to be using these SCX24 links that I found. Now, I'm fairly certain these are deadbolt uppers and lowers. I'm not sure. I just took them out of the pile of links that I had. But just looking at these, I think they're just right. So the next step, I'm going to pop these links off, stretch it, and then put the chassis back together. So here's the moment of truth. I got the 51 turn motor in there. Everything's bolted up. Got the big tires on. I will go over in detail what I had to do to this thing. It was not nearly as easy as I thought. But everything is in. I got steering. I spit a drive shaft just like that. God. Okay, here we go. Should be good to go. Drive shafts something going on. What is going on with my front drive shaft? That thing's gone too. It's alive. It's a little ugly right now, but we're getting there. Okay, got it buttoned up. Man, it's fast. Whoa, it's super fast. I don't know how I like that. I think that SCX24 transmission is too high geared for this thing. It'll be interesting to see how this works. I might have to go back to the stock motor. But there it is. Looks pretty rad. Wait, what a project. Alright, I'm going to have some fun with it, tweak it a little bit, and then I will circle back with you guys. So let's recap on this thing. It's been a little while since I shot that footage of me initially modifying this truck, and I think I've got this sorted out now where it's in a position to go over it in more detail. It's held up pretty well, we've run it pretty hard, and it seems to be doing great. So let's take a look at what we finally ended up doing with this thing after a lot of trial and error. So, as you can see, we did manage to put the big FMS tires and wheels on it. They are cool. Pretty unassuming, I gotta say. I wish they had more of a wow factor. They just fit this build so well, it almost looks like they came on it. So I didn't get the shock factor that I was really looking for with these tires, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. They do look cool on there. They are big. They just fit the character so well that it doesn't really look like a built rig. Opening up the body, we can see that I was able to get that RC all-wheel drive 51 turn 180 motor in there with the billet transmission. Now, this is the SCX24 transmission, which is fine, except for the gearing on this is so astronomically high that this thing is extremely fast. Really struggles with low speed crawling, which is a bummer considering towing is one of the primary things that I wanted to do with this. Although it does have a lot of grunt with that 180 motor in it. But the motor fit in there really well. The skid plate bolted right up, links bolted right up to it, so it was a fairly easy swap with that motor. The only thing that I did have to do was take the power switch off of the receiver and ESC combo here, and I had to Dremel off a little bit of this tray to make room for the larger can. But once that was done, it fit in there perfectly. So the switch is just kind of flopping around here a little bit, but it's out of the way and fine. There's no issues there. Underneath this thing, so this is where I got super hung up. A couple things. So let me back up first. So you might notice that the shocks, I've gone back to the stock shocks, and that's because the TRX 4M shocks were just too long. They were pushing down on the axles too much, and I was losing drive shafts left and right. So I ended up putting the FMS friction damp shocks back on here and just capitalizing on the multitude of options available on this chassis to mount your shocks. So I used those to lift the chassis up a little bit, and that seemed to sort things out. However, I was not able to escape underneath here without some significant modifications, primarily in the middle and rear drive shafts and the rear linkage. So what I had to do with the drive shaft here in the middle, I ended up doing a Gladiator drive shaft here from the SCX24, which fit okay, but I ran into issues because it would spit off the U-joints constantly. So what I ended up doing was making hybrid drive shafts using the metal hardware from the FMS U-joints and popping them into the SCX24 drive shafts. That seemed to hold up well because these things were just spitting off left and right because of the power of the motor. In the rear is where things got really complicated. I went through so many different linkage combinations, and I ended up settling on JLU front lower links for the upper and lower in the rear, and I ended up using a JLU length front drive shaft for the rear of this thing, and that's how I was able to stretch it enough to clear these big tires. And as you can see, I've got room for even bigger if I so choose. But that was very complicated. and was the most tedious part of this build. But here she sits. It's got the big tires on it. Everything clears. No rubbing from the steering. The suspension feels nearly like factory. And drive shafts and everything stay intact. So I do want to show you how this thing runs. So I'm going to do some speed comparison so you can see how fast this thing is. And then we'll take it out and we'll get some crawling footage. So let's get into it. All right, let me give you some perspective on the speed here. So on the right-hand side, we've got the FCX24 Power Wagon stock motor, but it is in the second gear, which is the high gear, and quite fast. Let's do a drag race here and see what we get. the Atlas takes a little while to wind up, but then it's gone. The Atlas 6x6 build. We did it. I've ruined it. That's clear. But it's done. So let's talk about this thing. So it really is a shame that there's not a lot of options to modify this thing the correct way. I mean, we basically just dug into our parts bin and Franken built this thing, doing the best that we could. It was a painstaking process. I'm fairly happy with how the chassis came out. We had to stretch the middle axle and the rear axle, which we did so successfully after a lot of trial and error, but we did it. Moving the shocks down gave us the clearance that we needed for the bigger tires. I'd like to run some wider tires. I'd like to put some Swamp Kings or something on here to give it a more meaty and kind of aggressive appearance. But that motor and transmission combo has no business being in this truck. The gearing from the SCX24 is just so tall. It really makes no sense in the Atlas 6x6. I mean, if you're going for pure speed, then possibly, but any type of off-roading just stops this thing in its tracks. I would come up against rocks about that big, and it could not climb them. So it just has zero torque. And the motor's working so hard to push that gearing that it kills the battery in about 10 minutes. Those 600 milliamp batteries that come with it, dead very, very quickly. And I even think towards the end of the Fort Phoenix trip where I was getting my outdoor run footage, I'm fairly certain that I cooked the motor because it just died on me on a moderate incline and gave up the ghost at that point, and even with a fresh battery would not do anything. I had steering but no throttle and no reverse. So I may have fried the motor. Anyway, which is probably a blessing in disguise because we got to overhaul the powertrain on this thing. So that's going to wrap it up for part 1 of the Atlas build. I am contemplating just throwing a FuryTech Rhino system into this thing and being done with it. That's the power that it needs. Then it would be able to tow. It would have all the torque in the world. It'd still have solid top end power for Axel to go have fun with. And it would be a much more balanced, cleaner setup, I think. But let me know your thoughts down below. What do you think of the Atlas 6x6 build? If you've built one of these, please let me know down below if you have any leads for parts. I'd love to hear your input. I want to do this thing right. I want to make it cool. But as always, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you haven't done so, and I will see you in the next video.